Okay, back to our topic on conservation at the biodiversity level. The question is, why have there not been more documented extinctions, given everything we've seen with habitat loss and degradation? And so the paper by Stork, 2009, outlines and discusses the various possibilities here. Why is this important? Because there is a belief that we are undergoing right now what's called the sixth mass extinction event. So this would be, if you look it up, the sixth mass, not massive, sixth mass extinction event, you get, it's even called the Holocene extinction. And there's, but it's not exactly, it's not something that has consensus among the scientific community. But I think, even though I think people are very concerned about, the question is has it actually, to what extent has it been confirmed? So for example, you see here's a title here, the sixth mass extinction, fact, fiction, or speculation. A question here, are we in the middle of the sixth mass extinction? So the reason it's controversial is because we haven't actually documented many extinctions. And how would you document those? Those would be documented on the IUCN Red List. That is the formal way of assessing of species. And if there's a consensus that it has gone extinct, the work has been done, then it is listed on the IUCN as extinct. There are, and one example of this is, for example, the Kauai o'o, which is a bird, a honeycreeper, which is now extinct on the Hawaiian Islands. It was found only on Kauai. This was a former distribution. And if you look at the assessment history of the species, you go from threatened, critically endangered to extinct, and it's been confirmed as extinct. So that's each one of these dates here you see here listed off to the left. These were separate assessments. I don't think they have to go back in and do any more assessing. Hawaii, by the way, is an island, even though it's a very small little speck out there in the Pacific, one of the northernmost of the major Hawaiian islands, it actually is quite, the forests on Kauai are extremely remote. And so the reason there's actually, for a while, it was considered possible that there really was, the o'o might still survive in those forests. That's how hard it is to get around in the forest on Hawaii. In any case, it is not, they're very confident that the species is now extinct. And we'll see is if the species does go extinct, then we expect to see sort of a progression toward that, a transition toward that. For example, here's a species, here, the little brown bat, which one time was one of the most common bats in Eastern North America and in Rhode Island. And you can see what's happened to it is now listed as endangered. It went from 1996 to being lower risk, least concern, 2008 least concern, to endangered in 2018. And part of this assessment comes from work that was done here in Rhode Island. And this species has suffered from white nose syndrome, which is an invasive fungus species. It's gotten into caves where the bats hibernate in other shelter spaces, and is in the process of wiping them out unless something changes. But why have we not documented more cases of actual extinctions? That's the question. And so we're just going to go through some of the possibilities. For one thing is there have been conservation efforts. Now I don't know what can be done about white nose syndrome in bats. There's probably not a lot we can actually do about that. You can shut off caves so that humans can't get in, but really the fungus is spreading from bat to bat, and so it's kind of that is probably keeping white nose syndrome from happening at this point is probably a lost cause. But there have been other species where we actually were able to physically go in and do something, remove the cause of the decline of the species, and therefore allow the species to come back, and then actively even boost the species, for example, by doing translocations. So the California condor is a famous example of this. It was down just a few individuals in the 1960s and 70s, and they are very sensitive to lead. It seems like a strange thing, but when someone the bullets go into like a rifle bullet, somebody goes out and hunts a deer in California. If the deer, hunter can't find the deer, that the animal gets scavenged, and the little bullet can actually be picked up and eaten accidentally by a scavenger. May not be a big problem for many species, but it is for the California condor. Seems crazy, doesn't it, that the lead bullets, this little thing could actually be one of the major contributing factors to the loss of the California condor. But there's also habitat loss as well. Anyway, the species right now, what's the status of the species right now? It's not extinct. It's one of the great success stories of being saved by conservation efforts. If that is, well, the reason why it's not extinct is because great efforts were made to keep it, boost the populations, including the extreme step of introducing it to an area where it might not actually be extinct. So Grand Canyon National Park is an area where you can go today and see California condors flying around. And it's not really clear they were actually there beforehand, but it is the kind of habitat they live in. They might have been there maybe some point in the last few thousand years. But the great thing about this is an area, a wild area, where they're not going to pick up a lot of lead, and they're large area where they can nest and not be disturbed. I just wanted to use that as an example of a species that where conservation efforts stop the extinction from happening. So that could be one possibility, reason why we're not seeing more extinction events. So, but here's a more complicated possibility, is that the species is currently persisting, but it won't be for very long, much longer. Maybe it'll persist for another generation or two, but eventually it's going to go extinct. So what we're seeing now is the species, it might seem like the species is surviving, but in fact, it's headed for extinction. What's this called? The term is called extinction debt. That is, it's kind of a weird concept to imagine, but it's almost like the damage has been done, you're going to pay for it later on. I guess you could think of that. Relaxation times, I don't know if I want to even try to explain that. Just when a habitat becomes degraded and chopped up and is now smaller, it may take time for the species to disappear from a smaller patch. But just an example of this, take a look here at the neotropical forest in the Amazon basin. For example, in Brazil, you zoom in here, you see the story of habitat fragmentation, forest fragmentation. And over the next few decades, unfortunately, we're going to see a lot more of this. In the patches of forest you see here, they may eventually go away. In the meantime, though, you could probably, there may be species that were found only in a very localized area. And if you were to go in now, you might be able to find them. A rare species of plant, or maybe a rodent, rare species of rodent, for example, or an insect. They might still live in these patches, but they're not going to be there for much longer. In other words, population sizes may be so low that they're at risk of going extinct, sort of just through random variation that all populations undergo. But for a small population, that could lead to extinction. Another possibility is that the species that we're seeing that haven't gone extinct, well, some species are more vulnerable than others to extinction. So go back to that example here of fragmentation. In Central and South America, you have fragmentation of forest. Imagine a bird species that is sort of willing, I guess you could say, or could tolerate nesting in a small patch of forest. So it formerly thrived in large forest, but a species of bird that will nest in a small fragment. We have plenty of examples of that here in Rhode Island. There are many species of birds, native birds, which will nest in the shrubs in front of your house, like a northern cardinal. So there are some species that are more tolerant of fragmentation than others. One example is the scarlet macaw. If you go visit, say, Costa Rica, you will probably see scarlet macaws. They are beautiful species, very well known. Their populations are currently of least concern, is the official assessment, but they are decreasing, but they're still just least concern. So there is some concern, but the official designation is least concern. Well, the thing about this, the scarlet macaw, is that they are species that will live around humans. So you will find them in very, in wilderness and intact forest. Has not been fragmented. However, they will also nest. If that forest gets fragmented, they can fly somewhere else, and they will actually nest in towns. And if you go to like a little town in Costa Rica we were in, there were hundreds of scarlet macaws. They were very loud. So it could be that in some cases the species is able to live in these small patches and fly back and forth or move around them. Other species, though, might not be able to tolerate a fragmented area, or they may not be able to move. They may not be very mobile. They may not be like a bird. Imagine a species of an amphibian that doesn't move very far. So once it goes extinct in one patch, it can't be recolonized. So basically, some species are going to be more vulnerable to going extinct in these fragmented areas than others, just because of their life, the way their life history traits are. Oftentimes, that's to do with mobility and tolerance to disturbance. And then finally, it is very difficult to actually confirm extinction. One of the best examples of this is this very frustrating endeavor, which is to confirm the extinction of the ivory-billed woodpecker. It's thought that the ivory-billed woodpecker actually is extinct and has been extinct for decades. However, there's an effort to look for them in forests of Arkansas, especially in Arkansas, but a few other places that are very swampy. And so these efforts, what do these efforts produce? They produce grainy photos and videos. So here's the nature, there's the bird there. It's a very large woodpecker, bigger than the pileated woodpecker, which is the biggest woodpecker we have now. And what evidence do we have they're still around? Well, people go in these forests in canoes. It's extremely hard to get around in. You can't even fly really a drone through any of this. You have to go in and sort of suffer through, making your way through very, very dense forest. It's really great that this actually still exists. What we have here is, I don't know if it's going to show it here, but we have grainy videos that were taken by people in canoes, and they're trying to look at those videos and try to exclude the possibility that it was another species. So there's a picture of the habitat. And really what it is, they want to make sure, exclude the possibility that it's a red-bellied woodpecker or a pileated woodpecker. And so a paper was produced, was recently published that reportedly the authors claim that they have excluded the possibility of it being another woodpecker. But as you can see here from these frames in this video here, this is the nature of the evidence. It's like this. Everything is like this. I don't want to get into this too much. It's just, my point is, it's very hard to actually confirm that a species is truly extinct, because are you going to go into an area and look in every little corner of that area, especially in a place like the swamp forest of Arkansas or the Amazon basin? What's another example here? Another example is the grizzly bear in Colorado. This is a species. So grizzly bears, of course, you think of Yellowstone or Glacier National Park or Alaska, British Columbia. They actually are not endangered. However, they are extinct in the state of Colorado. And so for the longest time, there was some suspicion they were still left. There might be a few left in the mountains of Colorado. And I actually was part of an expedition to look for them, and we didn't find any sign of them. But there's been DNA tests of bear scat, and there's some Yeah, I'd say there's probably like the consensus is there's about a 5 to 10% chance that they're actually out there, whatever that means. There actually are still some in Colorado. It's very, very hard to confirm actual extinction itself. You might be wondering, though, what does it matter if there's a few grizzly bears left in Colorado? A few individuals does not make up a viable population. So we're going to sort of shift out of this way of thinking and thinking of, well, what does it all mean anyway? Sabalos et al. 2017 published a paper where basically they quantified, did a massive review of the literature and compiled data into a meta-analysis. And what they documented was not extinctions, but a massive global scale loss of populations. That is, you pick a population of a species and you look at, if you have evidence on how it's changed over the last several decades, you see decline. And not just endangered species, but even common species. So this is a signal that extinction is ongoing and it is happening, even if we haven't confirmed it. So they point out here, the strong focus on species extinctions overlooks the current trends of population declines and extinctions. So this paper is Sabalos et al. Find this in. Sabalos, Ehrlich, and Durso. What they did was you used the IUCN Red List, which is capable of the way it's set up. As long as assessment continues over the next, over a period of decades, you can monitor the decline of a population. If it's actually happening. So what did they find? Well, we'll look at what they found and look at the evidence in the graphs here. But what came out of this study was something called the Living Planet Index. An index, by the way, is a very important concept and a thing in conservation biology, just like it is in many other fields like economics. What is an index? I want you to think about what an index really is. When you say index, I don't know if anybody knows, the average public knows what that even means, but maybe you've heard of, for example, the Dow Industrial Index in economics, which is a measurement of the amount of trade of stocks in the stock market. So if you have a lot more trading, a lot more buying and selling, that index goes up. And what that index tells you is how much buying there is relative to selling. That's not really important. It's not an economic, but the point is that you actually cannot physically measure or keep track of every interaction, buying and selling event that happens on Wall Street. And in nature, you cannot. You can't actually. All you can do is estimate population size and decline and increase of populations. You can't even. It's extremely difficult to actually confirm extinctions, and you can never know the actual size of a population. But what you can do is you can look at the evidence for increase or decrease, and then you can develop an index. And here's the important thing about an index. An index, if it's useful, if it actually works well, then if the thing you're interested in is increasing, the index will increase. Or if the thing you're interested in that you can only estimate, you can't precisely measure, is decreasing, or is decreasing, then the index will decrease. So the index goes up and down faithfully and reliably. Is the real thing you're interested in goes up or down. And the real thing we're interested in here is population size. So here is the Global Living Planet Index. And it's showing it, what you see here, look at this is 1970, going down toward the present time, and you see a decline, a continual decline. So where does this come from, and what is this actually, where is this from? Again, this is not, you're seeing in this graph here, is not documented extinctions. Instead, what it is it reflects documented cases of population decline, where populations get smaller and smaller and smaller, using the IUCN Red List and also other studies that have found, that have measured population size. Something else I want to point out here is that if you go out into the literature and look at what's known, not all populations, you're going to have populations that have been documented as declining, and populations that are increasing, and populations that are, don't tend to change much or in any particular direction over decades. For example, nearly half of the 177 mammal species surveyed lost 80% of their distribution. So this is, you look at where they were before and where they are now, and you have loss, and that reflects a decreasing population. That is an incredible statistic. So since 1900, 80% of the area where you were found a species, now you don't find them there anymore. That's on a global scale. This here shows the percentage of land mammals from different continents undergoing decline. So what you're seeing here off to the right-hand side is the amount of decline. So comparing Africa, Asia, Australia, Europe, and North America, and you have different levels of declines. This percentage of species in each category of range shrinkage. So this case here, in Texas, what they did is they took evidence and data from you have the original range in which the species lived, and now you have the range in which it's found now. For example, I'll just give you an example of this, is the scarlet macaw. The scarlet macaw, if you zoom in here's the distribution, the current distribution of the scarlet macaw. You can see why it's not listed as endangered, even though the population trend is decreasing, because it still has a vast area over which it still lives, including the Amazon basin. If you zoom in here in Central America, what you see is it is extinct over the hatched distribution here. That's the area over which it is no longer found. So it's still holding on in Belize, in Guatemala, and parts of Costa Rica, and parts of the East Coast here in the Caribbean. But if you zoom in here, you see that it's from the former range has shrunken down in Central America. And so the data that come from Ceballos, they went in, this is for mammals, but you could do the same thing with birds. So what you're seeing here is this is an indicator, an index is an indicator of the way things are going for biodiversity, which is if you just look at every species for which we have data, decade to decade, year to year data on their population size or their range, what do you see? You see shrinkage in the range, and you see a decline, on average, a decline in population size. So in sum, where does this leave us? On that question of, where are things? We're not seeing mass extinction, okay, as we're not documenting mass extinction. But extinction probably is happening that we're not documenting. And we are headed for extinction. It just hasn't happened yet because the populations are still in decline. So that's the take-home message here. This is what the evidence indicates. Later this semester, we're going to take a look at a particular example of what we you just heard here, which is the so-called global insect apocalypse, decline apocalypse. That overall, in general, in the United States in North America and in Europe especially, we're seeing a decline in the biomass, insect biomass. Not extinction of particular species. Again, that's very hard to document and hasn't really been documented much. But what we're seeing here is down, 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 down go the population size. And what this case example we're going to look at is where they went in and actually measured biomass, weight of insect mass in a part of Europe, they were able to actually show that decline in terms of mass of insects. But the question still remains about, we just don't know. We don't really, even though extinction is something you always hear about in conservation and biodiversity, we actually haven't documented a lot of it. I hope you now have a good understanding for all the possible reasons why we haven't actually documented extinctions. The next lecture, we're going to turn our attention to actual populations of a particular species themselves.